There was just so much.
You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this podcast on, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures.
Not many people are asked most days of their life to recount a particular couple of minutes, a very specific couple of minutes. But Emma Carey is constantly. How long does it take to fall 14,000 metres?
That's tough to answer because it would have probably been 2 minutes. But
that's quite a long time.
It is a long time to be in a state of fear. I always explain it as, which is a really bad example to give, but that feeling when you're sitting on a chair and you fall backwards or you trip, that feeling of like, but it lasts 2 whole minutes. That's a really long time for that feeling to last.
But it didn't start when you jumped out of the helicopter.
No.
I can't believe you jumped out of a helicopter.
You haven't done it?
Of course I haven't done it. I will never do it. But you say it hadn't occurred to you that anything could go wrong.
No, which sounds so silly in hindsight.
Yes.
It does. But I was only 20 and I love anything kind of adrenaline seeking.
Yeah.
And so I knew that it was dangerous, obviously, but I never stopped to think about it. I just thought it sounded fun, like a new experience, and I went into it with nothing but excitement.
Emma had just turned 20 and she was travelling through Europe on a holiday with her best friend in the world when they decided to go skydiving in Switzerland. And like any adventure-loving young person, she wasn't really focused on the possible danger or the consequences if things went wrong, just what an amazing experience it would be. However, as the ground rushed up to meet her and she wasn't getting a response from her instructor, who she was strapped to, and there was no parachute in sight, she knew something was really wrong. Emma hit the ground. And as you might have guessed from the fact that she joined me for this interview, she survived. Miraculously, she didn't even lose consciousness. So she remembers every single detail of that day.
I knew that it was up to me to go and find help. And it was in that moment when I tried to roll over to get him off me and I tried to stand up that I realised I was completely paralysed from the waist down.
And that's not even the half of Emma Carey's incredible story, because it's what happened next that you really won't believe. From Mamamia, I'm Mia Friedman, and you're listening to No Filter with Emma Carey, the girl who literally fell from the sky. How many of those 2 minutes were fun?
Probably the first 30 seconds. The part when we were meant to be free-falling, that was fun. But when we were free-falling when we weren't supposed to, that was not.
I imagine because it was the first time you'd done it, you didn't have an instant realisation that you were in trouble. How long did it take for that realisation to dawn?
So I felt a tap on my shoulder, which means we need to cross our arms over our chest, and that's when they pull the parachute. So I was expecting it straight after the tap on my shoulder.
So you'd been taken through it in a bit of a rehearsal.
Yeah. And when I felt the tap, the next thing I felt was my hair being pulled backwards. And I didn't initially think that something was wrong. I just thought, that's so weird. No one has warned me that it hurts.
Were you wearing a helmet?
No. So I just thought it was so odd that no one had told us about that.
And why was your hair being pulled backwards?
So I didn't realise at the time, but the cords of the parachute had got tangled and wrapped around the instructor's neck, and in doing so they also grabbed my hair and pulled that backwards. But I didn't know what it was at the time. And
so we're still falling thinking, wow.
Yeah, I was still thinking, amazing. I was like, oh, it's a bit weird. And I was yelling out to the instructor just saying, are we okay? Like, is this supposed to happen? And he wasn't responding. And in the beginning, I thought maybe he just can't hear me over the sound of the wind. And then as more time went on, and this all would have been like within 10 seconds that I had all these realizations, and he wasn't responding and we were still falling the same speed, I very quickly realized something was wrong. And then the moment that really cemented it was I saw a red parachute tangled up in a ball in front of me while we were still falling, rather than above us and open to slow us down.
Did he say anything to you at any stage on the way down?
No, so he was unconscious the whole time, which I didn't realise. And I thought, I didn't even know if he was attached to me anymore because I couldn't move my head at all because it was pulled back by the cords. So I couldn't see him. I couldn't hear him. I honestly didn't know if I was just falling by myself.
And why was he unconscious?
because as the cords came out, the emergency parachute and the main parachute got tangled together. And in doing so, the cords also wrapped around his neck and strangled him. So he was unconscious the entire fall.
You talk about a second earlier it would have been fine, a second later it would have been fine. Was human error involved?
Yeah, and he admitted so. So he forgot to wear his altimeter, I never know how to pronounce it, the thing which tells you how high you are and at what altitude you need to pull the parachute. So he forgot to wear that. And so he pulled our parachute too late.
He forgot,
yeah. But I think that as an experienced skydiver, so I've heard they don't even use that sometimes. They can just tell how high they are because they've done it so many times. But there are a few other factors involved, like it was cloudy that day, so we had to jump under the clouds a bit lower than a normal height. And there were a few other factors involved that all led to this one thing. And so if he had pulled it 1 second earlier, it would have opened completely fine. And if he had pulled it 1 second later, the emergency chute would have already been out by then and that one would have opened fine. So it was the case of 1 second.
So what happened? They both came out at the same time?
Yeah, so there's an emergency one which comes out at a certain altitude if you're still falling too fast at a certain height. There's like this mechanism that can sense that. And so because our parachute wasn't out yet, the emergency one was coming out automatically. And by some chance, it came out the exact same time that he pulled it. So they were coming out together, which I don't know if that's ever happened before.
As you were falling and it did dawn to you, oh, we're fucked. What did you think about?
So, yeah, this is where time warped because although it was only maybe 2 minutes or less, I had so much time to think. I remember having so many different streams of thought. The main one was I felt this deep sense of regret that I had lived 20 years and I'd never once taken a moment to stop and think about how thankful I was to be alive. I was quite a pessimistic person and I just took everything for granted and I was just kind of plodding through life. I didn't wake up excited for the day and I just thought, what a shame that I'm only realizing just how much I want to live and just how much I want to experience when I only have 10 seconds left.
Did you think about people?
Yeah. I thought about my friend Gemma, who was jumping after me. I thought how she was going to have to find me on the ground. I thought about my friends and family, and I had a partner at the time, so I thought about him. There were so many thoughts in a time when you would think there wouldn't really be any. It made me realize that the little things really are the big things, and everyone says that. But in a moment like that, it was so clear. Like I was thinking about how I'd made myself a sandwich for after the skydive and I would never get to eat it. I had washing in the washing machine that I would never get to take out and everything just felt so unfinished.
The fear must have been unbelievable.
Unbelievable. When I was writing the book, I found it hard because we use the word fear for so many things, but this was unlike anything I'd ever experienced before, that it felt wrong to use that same word that we use for so many much smaller things. But it was so all-encompassing and I've never feared for my life in that way before.
As the ground rushed up to meet you, did any part of you think I might survive this?
No, not at all. I could feel how fast we were going and I could see how close the ground was. I didn't think it was possible to survive.
I imagine you've since learnt how fast you were going.
I actually don't know. We didn't slow down at all. So just the speed of
gravity.
Yeah, which is crazy. And people always say, how did you survive? And I honestly don't know. And I try not to think about it too hard because it's just a bit mind-blowing to think about.
Instinctively, as the ground came up, did you put your hands out in front of you? Did you pull your legs up? What did your body do?
I pulled my legs up. I kind of went into like the fetal position. I just curled up into a ball. And actually that could be what helped. So no one has said this in any of the investigations, but the more I've thought about it, I think perhaps what did help us was the fact that the skydive instructor was unconscious. And when you're unconscious, your body is obviously like floppy.
Relaxed.
And apparently that's a better way to hit the ground rather than being tense. And so because I was curled up in a ball and he obviously couldn't because he was unconscious, his legs, I imagine, are what hit first and maybe took a lot of the landing.
You didn't lose consciousness?
No.
When you hit?
Yeah.
Do you remember the noise?
I don't remember the noise exactly, but I remember the moment. And I remember thinking, this can't be real. It just felt so surreal and so it felt like a movie. I was like, as if skydiving accidents happen in real life. Like, that can't be true. That doesn't happen to me. And I was on this European holiday. So, and when you're on holidays, you're not really thinking about consequence. And I just felt in complete shock before I could even register any injuries or anything. I just remember thinking, this isn't real.
Did you think that you might be dead?
Yeah, I did. Particularly when my next feeling after the shock was my body was just filled with the most intense pain I've ever felt in my life. I didn't even know where it was coming from. It was just excruciating. And I've never known pain to be something so unbearable like that. And I remember thinking, maybe this is hell. Like, maybe I've died, because I'd never experienced anything like that before.
You fell on your stomach or on your legs. He was still on top of you.
Yeah.
I guess you assumed he was dead.
I did, yeah, because he hadn't responded the entire time we were falling. And then when we landed, he still wasn't responding either. So I assumed that he was. And thankfully, he survived and he shattered his legs, which explains why I think they landed first. But yeah, I definitely thought so at the time. And I was pinned down by the weight of him, but I could kind of like move my neck around to see where we were. And we were in the middle of the Swiss Alps. So there was no one around. There were no buildings. There were no people. And so I thought, it's up to me to go and find help. I hoped that he wasn't dead, but I knew that either way he was very seriously injured. So I knew that it was up to me to go and find help. And it was in that moment when I tried to roll over to get him off me and I tried to stand up that I realized I was completely paralyzed from the waist down.
You learn in first aid and at school sort of what to do if you think someone might have a spinal injury and you're not meant to move them because it can make it worse. Did any sort of information or survival education come back to you in those moments?
Not at all. It sounds so silly now, but I didn't.
None of it sounds silly.
But I didn't register at all that I'd broken my back. I just thought, why aren't my legs working? What's going on? I was, again, in that state of shock, going from being able to do something for 20 years of your life without a second thought to, in a split second later, not being able to do that thing. It was just so confusing. It never crossed my mind, oh, yep, broken back, better not move. So I was like thrashing about, trying to roll him off me and screaming and yelling. I definitely didn't think to keep still.
You were screaming and yelling so you could breathe. Your lungs didn't collapse.
No, yeah. I have no idea how, although my injuries were very serious, I have no idea how there weren't so many more injuries.
Has anyone been able to tell you? Because people fall from much, much, much lower heights and don't survive.
Yeah, I don't know. I think as I said, it could have been his legs landing first. We landed on grass and there was a road 2 meters away. I don't think that would make that much difference, the grass, but I have no idea. And I used to think about it a lot because I felt like the fact that I survived something that should be so impossible to survive, it put so much pressure on me, being like, why am I here? Why am I still alive? I have to do something so remarkable with this second chance that so many people don't get. And it's overwhelming to think about. So I really don't know.
Back in the field, you're trying to get this guy off your back and he's attached to you. You can't move your legs. How long until your best friend Gemma, who jumped out of the helicopter with her instructor just after you, how long until she landed?
Again, that was probably only 2 minutes. And she didn't realise that something was wrong as she was falling, but her instructor must have, because we landed, I think, 1 kilometre from where we were supposed to land and they followed us down. But it felt like an eternity laying there waiting. I didn't know if anyone would find us. I had no idea what would happen next, but it would have only been about 2 minutes. And then when they did land, she ran over to me and I could just see this terror in her eyes, trying to catch up with all of the thoughts I'd already had time to process, like the shock and the just all of it. I could see it all across her face, and she quickly just sprung into action. And she, across the other side of the field, there were these 2 people walking by, and she ran over to them and grabbed their phone and gave it to her instructor to call for help. And then she called my mum. She really went into, as a 20-year-old in a foreign country dealing with this crazy, unexpected situation, she just knew what to do in that moment.
She didn't leave you For how long after that?
For weeks, she was by my side in hospital, sleeping on the floor. Yeah, and we've been best friends since we were 5, so I didn't think it was possible to get closer because we were already so close, but living through the hardest times of your life with someone, and because in the beginning days it was just us before my family could get over there, it really bound us in a way that I didn't know was possible.
How long did you have to wait in the field until help arrived?
Probably an hour, maybe, because we needed an ambulance came. But as soon as they saw us and the extent of our injuries, they very quickly realised we'd need a helicopter, not an ambulance. So it took a while for that to get there.
Could they give you pain relief?
I don't think I had it until I got in the helicopter. Yeah. I remember thinking that the pain was going to kill me. It was so unbearable and it kept growing worse every second. And I remember screaming at people to just roll me over because I thought, surely it would hurt less if I could just move positions or have water, but they obviously had the forethought that I couldn't have anything in my body because I was about to go into surgery, and obviously they couldn't move me, but yeah, it was unbearable.
So you were just face down in this field?
Face down, yeah. My mouth was covered in blood because I shattered a lot of my teeth, and yeah, it was awful.
They got the instructor off you by this stage.
Yeah.
What did you talk about in the field until the helicopter arrived?
I remember one of the main things I kept saying was all of my teeth have fallen out. I think I was trying to put my focus on something less serious because dealing with the extent of what was really going on was too much to think about. So the main thing I kept saying was my teeth have gone, and everyone kept saying they're still there, and I just wouldn't believe them.
Were they there?
They were there, yeah. A few of them got chipped and they were all wobbly, but they were there.
So what was Gemma doing through this time? Was she trying to distract you? Do you remember what else she was saying and what you were talking about?
She just kept saying that everything was going to be okay. And she called my mum. So she was already organising things back home and telling people.
Could you hear her talking to your mum?
Yeah, and she put my mum on the phone actually. And
your mum.
I know. And it was about 11 p.m. in Australia on a Sunday night or something. So my mum had thought we were joking because we'd been friends forever and we always used to just play pranks and just always loved to joke. When Gemma called her, she genuinely thought she was joking.
Did she know you were going skydiving?
I think we'd called her earlier that morning, to tell her.
And did she say don't do it?
Probably, yeah. She's definitely not one for those kind of things.
What did she say to you when Gemma put her on the phone?
Well, I remember as soon as she heard my voice, she could hear it in my voice that it was real, that we weren't joking. And I can't really remember what exactly she said, but I just remember it made it all feel so real because up until that moment, it had just been me and Gemma and all of these strangers around us that I didn't know. And as I said before, when you're on holiday, you don't think of consequence. It doesn't feel like real life a lot of the time. And so hearing my mum and being able to picture her at home in our house, I realised that the consequence of what had happened would last until I got home as well. It wasn't something that I could just erase by getting on a flight and going back home. This was permanent and this was really big.
Did you cry hearing her voice?
Yeah, I think I was crying the whole time I was laying there.
You spent about a month in hospital. What was that month like? What are your memories of it?
I remember the first 2 weeks, my memory is really hazy because I was on such strong painkillers.
Thank God.
Yeah, thank God. Yeah, I remember as soon as I got in the helicopter, they put painkillers in my veins and they worked so well that I was laying in the helicopter looking out the window thinking, this is lovely. This is a great way to see Switzerland. We didn't even have to pay for this flight.
Were you at all nervous getting back in a helicopter and being high up?
No, I was loving it by this stage, I thought. And it made me realise that you can feel joy and laugh in your hardest moments. And I never felt that contrast before in my life.
Were you aware that going, oh, this is lovely, was a ridiculous response to what was going on?
I just thought, what am I doing?
Yeah.
How am I laughing right now? But it's possible. So the first 2 weeks was very hazy. And I think once they started to turn down the painkillers and I could think with a lot more clarity, I remember waking up one morning and having this kind of like an epiphany because up until that moment, I'd been so devastated and depressed and I thought there wasn't a single thing worse that could have happened and I thought it was all awful. I couldn't see any silver lining to any of it, which is very natural after something like that, so immediate. But 2 weeks later, I woke up and I remember looking around the hospital room and nothing was different. My legs were still paralyzed. I still had my catheter bag attached to me. It was all the same, but something in me felt different. And it was just this realization that what had happened. And no matter how much I wanted to take it back and how much I wish I could undo it, I never could. So there really wasn't much use in laying there and trying to turn the clock back for the rest of my life and just resenting this one single thing. And so I realized that I had a choice. And like my memory of this is so clear. I remember laying there and vividly thinking, you can be paralyzed and depressed and miserable, or you can be paralyzed and try to create a fulfilling, exciting life regardless. But either way, I'm going to be paralyzed. So it's up to me to control the things that I can control. And from that moment, I saw the whole thing completely different. And I think what really helped me through was the fact that I was awake for the entire fall and when I landed, because even though that was awful at the time, I will always have that very vivid memory of how it feels to think I only have 10 seconds left to live and that strong yearning I had to survive. So even though things were hard in hospital and in the years following, above all of it, I just felt so lucky that I even got to be experiencing it.
So you were aware of the reprieve in a way, because a lot of people, if they have a sudden accident, they're not aware that it's happening in the way that you had those agonizing seconds, but you're saying perversely that was what gave you some form of gratitude afterwards.
I think so, because not many people would have the experience of a whole minute thinking you're about to die. That's a really long time to be able to ponder that. And so I think that really did help me, even though it's not a great memory, I think it did help in the long run.
Was there a single person who said to you, like in a movie or a TV show, Emma, you are never going to walk again?
Yeah, but it was far less dramatic than it seems in the movies. I remember this doctor came in one morning and they speak Swiss German over there, and the doctors could speak English but not all fluently. And he was listing all of my injuries and in passing said, you've got a spinal cord injury at L1. The messages can't get from your brain to your legs, and because of that, you'll never walk again, and this is permanent. And then he just moved on to the next thing. And it was so casual that I thought it was a prank. It didn't feel real. I always imagined that moment people would sit you down and like kind of crowd around your bed, and it would be this really impactful, special moment where people like, feel free to cry, like let it out. Here's how we're going to deal with this. But there was none of that. It was just so casual. And then he left the room. I was like, I don't know what to do with.
Was anyone with you?
In my memory, I'm alone. There might have been other people in the room, but in my memory, it was just, I felt very alone.
Did you say to him, hang on, wait a sec, can you just go through that again? Or were you in still a little bit out of it? How soon after the accident was this?
This was probably 2 days afterwards. So I was still a bit out of it, and it was such a shock. I just
shock on top of shock.
Shock on top of shock. I feel like I couldn't even speak. I couldn't register what I was hearing, and I didn't believe it. And when I say that to people, they think I mean it in a way of like, if you believe you can do it, you can do it. Like if you don't listen to that, then
yeah, right.
But it wasn't like that at all. I just didn't believe it because I'd been able to walk for my whole life. Yeah. Of course I would walk again.
You couldn't process it.
I couldn't process what it meant.
Did he keep having to tell you? Like, how did you end up accepting it, and who did you ask all your questions to?
Well, while I was in Switzerland, which was a month, I feel like I didn't really get any answers because I couldn't have a full conversation with any other doctors or nurses. So I was really excited to go back to Australia in the hospital there and be able to really sit down and talk to people and understand what it really meant. But as more time went on and my legs weren't working, it just slowly started to sink in. And I think I just needed time to catch up to my new reality because it was all so sudden. So before I even got to Australia, I had realised how serious it was and how permanent it was, and it had kind of started to catch up to me.
After the break, I asked Emma the question that you're probably already thinking. How come you can walk? And the answer may not be what you expect. Emma, how come you can walk? How come you walked in here and can walk in the same way that I can walk? And I've never had a spinal cord injury. I've never been told what you were told. I've never fallen from the sky.
So this is one of those things that I feel very passionate about answering this in the right way, because a lot of very well-intended people will say to me, it was because of my positivity or my resilience or determination, whatever it was. And yeah, I was so determined in physio and I tried so hard and it was a lot of hard work, but that's just not the case at all, because I have so many friends and I met so many incredible people over the years who, both paraplegics and quadriplegics, who are the most inspiring, positive, driven people, and yet they haven't got back up out of their chair. So if it came down to that, absolutely everybody would be up walking again. So I just...
It's not for lack of trying that
absolutely.
The people who can't
it's
walk
not something that
wanting.
You can manifest and believe hard enough and it'll happen. I think it is just honestly pure luck in the way that my spinal cord was damaged. That's all I think it is.
When did it occur to you that it was even a possibility that you might walk again or that you would regain any function?
Yeah, once I got back to Australia, the movement started coming back, but very slightly. So first I could move my toes and then my foot. And over the weeks and months, it just slowly progressed. So at first I could use a walking frame that I would lean my weight fully onto and I could just drag my legs under me. And then eventually I could use 2 crutches, which felt a bit more like a realistic way to get about in the real world as well, not just in hospital. And then by the time I left hospital, I mainly used 1 crutch. Well, most of the time, actually, I still used my wheelchair because it was a lot easier, but I could take a few steps on my own.
Over what period of time did this progression happen?
That was about 4 months that I was in hospital. And then for the next year and a half, I still used 1 crutch, mainly because my balance is really tricky, even to this day. So I never realized that it would be possible to get movement back, but not the sensation. So even now, 9 years on, I still can't feel anything from the waist down. I still don't have bladder and bowel control. All of the other aspects of a spinal cord injury are still there. But yeah, the lack of feeling makes it hard to balance because you can't tell where your feet are in relation to your body or the ground.
You've brought it up, so I'm going to ask you, bladder and bowel control is something that people would assume, but you're walking, why do you need a catheter and why can't you control bodily functions?
Yeah, it's just that part for me never healed. And spinal cord injuries are all so unique, I've learned. So I know people who can't move anything from the neck down, yet they still have bladder or bowel control. Or I know people who can feel their legs entirely but can't move them. There's so many different variations of how it can affect people. And for me, the bladder and bowel function never came back. So I needed to learn to use catheters and enemas. Not only can I not go, but I also can't feel when I need to
go.
I can't even remember how that feels.
Yeah. You had a boyfriend when
Yes.
the accident happened.
Yeah.
I mean, you were 20, and I don't want to be patronising about being 20 in love, but how long had you guys been together?
We've been together for 3 years.
So that's a really long time.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't, we met in a club
Yeah.
while I was in Europe. And
Yeah, it was a long time and it
That's
did
a
feel
really long time.
It felt really serious. Even though in hindsight we were so young, at the time it didn't feel like it. It felt like this is it.
Of course. He wasn't with you in Europe
No.
when you had your accident. When did you first speak to him afterwards?
I think that day when I was in hospital, I kept asking for a phone. He was the first person that I wanted to call when I hit the ground. And
He was your person?
Yeah, he was my person. He's who I would have got the most comfort from at that time. And I don't remember that conversation, again, because of the painkillers. I don't remember a lot of the conversations I had with him while I was in hospital, but I didn't see him again until I got back to Australia.
How did your relationship develop from when you got back?
I remember seeing him for the first time and instantly knowing that we weren't going to last, because I imagined how I would feel if the situations were reversed and the urgency that I would feel to see him after something that scary happening.
And were you like so wanting to see him?
Oh, absolutely. I'd been waiting for this moment ever since I fell, and I could just feel the contrast of it when he walked in the room and was very casual. didn't run over to me, didn't give me – it wasn't this world-stopping moment that I imagined it would be. And, when you just – I couldn't admit it to myself yet, but, you can just feel it. I knew I knew that we were done.
Like when you said when Gemma walked over to you in the field and you could see on her face what you needed to know.
Yeah.
That was then mirrored when you looked at his face.
Yes, exactly.
Again, really bad news.
Yeah.
That you saw in his face.
Yeah.
I imagine you didn't want to accept that. So then what happened?
I don't think I could let myself think about it because there was so much else going on.
Oh, and one more, piece of heartbreak while you were trying to deal with everything.
Yeah. But eventually, it's probably a few weeks later, maybe a few months after I'd been in hospital. Well, I was still in hospital. He came in one day and told me that he was going to Europe to go on this backpacking trip. And he didn't say it meant that we were breaking up. But again, I knew I could feel that. And I was so heartbroken to the point where if someone would have said, you have one wish, what do you want? I would have chosen him over healing my legs without a second thought. And that's why I wanted to include that in the book, because now being 29 and looking back on it, I know that we were so young and it seems so silly, like love at that age and relationships at that age, but it was so impactful and profound. And I know that a lot of people will relate to that experience with their first love and first heartbreak, but it honestly was harder to deal with than being paralyzed.
But I imagine the two were intertwined because he was an anchor to your former life before the accident, right? In the same way as Gemma, but Gemma was presumably not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Your family wasn't going anywhere, but he could leave and he did.
Yeah. I think that was what was hardest to deal with. It was even before we broke up, it seemed like my entire identity had been taken away. I could no longer walk, but I was a really athletic person before that, so I could no longer do all the sports and activities that I loved. I couldn't work anymore. I couldn't be independent anymore. All of these aspects of my identity had been taken away from me, and he was such a part of my identity that when he left too, I just remember feeling like I had no idea who I was anymore.
People, I think, often like to think that when you experience a tragedy or a trauma, things like body image or feeling sexually attractive are unimportant or, drop right down the list of priorities. How were those things impacted, firstly by the accident in those early months and then by him leaving?
To be honest, for me, they really did drop down the list because as I was laying in that field paralyzed, my entire perspective of my body shifted in an instant, because before that, being 20, when I looked at my body, I saw it as an object and I criticized its outer appearance, and I'd never stopped to think about how lucky I was for all of the things that my body did for me.
Yeah.
And laying there, not being able to walk, I would have done absolutely anything to have two legs attached to me regardless of what they looked like. All I wanted was to be able to get up and move on with my life and my holiday.
It wasn't about a thigh gap.
Absolutely.
Anymore.
Yeah, I couldn't care less.
So you did get that perspective.
I did get that perspective. There's been no part, even now, throughout my whole 20s, where most people do experience body image issues and things like that. I am very lucky to have never felt that, because I just feel so much gratitude for my body and what it does for me. But even beyond that, being in the spinal ward, I remember having this other profound moment where I was sitting around this table talking to all of the friends that I'd made, most of who couldn't move from the neck down and some from the waist down, and just thinking we've all lost such a huge part of our body's functionality. So the message of be grateful for what your body can do rather than how it looks, it seemed kind of void in that situation. But I realized there was something deeper than that, and it was the fact that our bodies are not who we are at all, because we were all still entirely whole beings. The people I was talking to were so intelligent and funny and kind and caring, and all of these other things were who we all were, even though 90% of their bodies had been taken away from them. It didn't take away a fraction of who they were. The value that I used to place on my appearance and my body just completely shifted after that.
There must have been a language that you guys were able to speak in that ward in the months that you spent there, the spinal injury ward in the Sydney hospital. What were some of the things that you would talk about, or some of the topics you could discuss that you couldn't with anyone else?
It's funny, a lot of the time we didn't speak about what was happening at all. It was probably unconscious that we didn't speak about the harder things, but we would always just be having a good time and joking around. I've really learned that everyone with a spinal cord injury is hilarious. It's like you break your back, but you get all this humor injected into you.
Wow.
We just had a great time trying to, I guess, lighten the load of what we were going through. That is
not what you would expect from a spinal cord injury ward.
No, I expected that it would be a very depressing, dark place where no one would want to talk to anyone and everyone would be walking on eggshells trying not to say the wrong thing. I thought it would be like that, but my experience of it anyway is not like that at all. I really enjoyed my experience in there. I made lifelong friends and living with people who were going through the hardest moments of their life at the same time I was, it just creates these really special bonds.
Forged in fire.
Yeah.
You had a really unique experience in that you were a wheelchair user and then you weren't. What did you learn about, visiting the disability community? Of course you are still part of that community, I assume, and you identify with that community, but you're a rarefied part of it in that you are able passing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a very unique experience, and particularly because I've been using a wheelchair. There was 2 separate times where I used a wheelchair for a year. 3 years later, or maybe 4 years later, I was in a wheelchair again because of a wound that I had in my foot. So I had the experience.
How did that wound happen?
Well, because I can't feel my feet or my legs, a problem with that is that I can't tell if I'm in pain. So I imagine that I must have stood on something, but because I didn't know, it went for maybe hours without me realizing, and it would have been getting worse and worse. And then I had a cast put on it by an orthopedic surgeon, which I don't think was the right thing to do because that made the wound far worse because it was just getting hot and sweaty and it wasn't a great environment for it. And because my legs don't work in the same way that they used to, healing takes a lot longer as well. So it took a year to heal something that would probably normally take a week. But so, I went from walking to wheelchair to walking to wheelchair to walking again. So
did you think that second time in the wheelchair, this is it, or you knew it was temporary?
I knew it was temporary, but oddly, I found that more difficult to deal with because in the beginning, in hospital, I very quickly accepted that I might live in a wheelchair, and I was genuinely okay with that because my priority in hospital was always my mental and emotional health. I wanted to make sure that I was okay whether or not I was walking again. I didn't want to put my whole focus on walking again because it felt risky to focus on something that might not happen for me. I didn't want to be relying on that one thing. But then the second time, I found it more difficult, I think because I had been so appreciative for getting back up on my feet, and I thought that I'd gotten out of this situation and I didn't expect to ever be back in it. So it was much harder mentally to deal with the second time.
How did people treat you differently when you're in a wheelchair and when you're not?
The main thing that I noticed is that people were kinder to me when I was in the wheelchair.
Which, funnily enough, pisses you off.
Yeah, which sounds like it would be an amazing thing, right?
Yeah.
And in the beginning, when I was in hospital and I was really struggling and I was so nervous to go out in my wheelchair because the world's so different from a different height, I really appreciated people giving me this patience and generosity that they didn't give me when I was on my feet. But as more time went on and I was no longer struggling and I was absolutely thriving, even though I was living in a wheelchair, and people were still treating me cautiously, that's when I realized that although a lot of the time people are very well intended with their kindness, a lot of the time it's pity, not actual kindness. Because people would kind of look at me and assume that my life sucked just because I was in a wheelchair, and that's why they would give me all of this extra help and this extra kindness. And it was funny when I got to the stage of recovery where I could choose on the day whether I would use my wheelchair or my crutches depending on how far I had to walk. So I would use both throughout the same day, and I would have a totally different experience in the world even though I was exactly the same person.
You got into a fight with a guy in a bar.
I really did, yes.
Why did you do that?
I didn't go in depth into the book at how angry I got at this man in the bar, but I was really riled up. So I was with my friend Sam, who uses a wheelchair, and we were just having a great time.
Were you using a wheelchair at that time?
No. And this man came up and just gave him a $100 note. And immediately I knew where this was going and I knew what it was for.
Was Sam busking?
No, he was innocently sitting in the bar having a good time with his friends. So there was no reason for it. And so I said to the man, what's the $100 for? And he said, and I'm not normally a confrontational person, so I must have just been in some kind of mood where I was ready. And he said, I think he's really inspiring. And I said, how do you know? And he said, well, he's out at the bar. And I said, so are you. Is that so amazing? And he said, well, I think he's really inspiring. And he had nothing to base that off besides the fact that he was in a wheelchair. And I said to him, like, this could be the shittiest, cruelest guy in the world. You have no idea, but you're assuming that he's this inspiring, amazing guy, and it's such an achievement that he's out of the house just because he's in a wheelchair. And my friend is the most incredible, inspiring guy. He just went to the Paralympics and he has so many amazing qualities, but this guy didn't give himself a chance to know that side of him at all because all he could see was the wheelchair. And by giving him $100, I think the part that annoyed me most was that he would have looked back on the situation, and when he tells his friends, he would have thought, I did this amazing deed. I gave this guy in a wheelchair $100 to make his day. And it's just condescending.
He took Sam's power away, didn't he?
Yeah. He didn't at all give himself a chance to know him. He assumed that he knew everything about him just by looking at him.
I'm not going to defend that, but I'm going to play devil's advocate and go back to something you said earlier, which was you take for granted not being able to do things spontaneously and the world being a more difficult place to navigate.
Yeah.
Could that guy have just been like, wow, I just came here and went to the bar. This guy had to navigate the world that is set up for able-bodied people, and good on him.
Yeah, that is true. And I think
it was the giving the money. Maybe think that in your head.
Yeah, it was the giving the money, and it was the way that he went about it, like just kind of like handing him the money and moving on with his day, as though it was something to make him feel better.
What did Sam do?
Well, Sam was really drunk, so he just took the money and we went to Macca's.
Got the next round.
Yep. He was like, Dulce, just let us keep the money. It's fine. But I was worked up.
You must get that all the time. You're so inspiring. You're so inspiring.
Which is a lovely thing for people to say, right?
The pressure, like the miracle, you fall from the sky.
Exactly.
Now you're inspiring.
I'm like, I feel I need to be this.
What if I just want to sleep in?
Yeah, exactly right. It's wonderful to be called inspiring, and it's amazing that people can think that. But I always hope that if people say that to me or to anyone, they're inspired by the things that are within my control. Like, as I said before, surviving a free fall, not in my control, some kind of miracle. Learning to walk again, not in my control. And so I don't want people to be inspired by those two things.
Yeah. I think it's so important what you said about not giving people false hope, because are there lots of people who are like, well, Emma walked, she fell from the sky and she can walk.
Yeah.
Maybe you can too.
Yeah.
And that must also be pressure of another kind, to be that kind of living embodiment of hope that is just not possible for most people with spinal cord injuries.
Absolutely. I think a lot of people expected my book to be this kind of instruction guide on how to do it. You can do it. If you believe anything hard enough, you can do it. And I made such a point for that not to be it, because it's so belittling to everyone who hasn't got out of their wheelchair. It's saying you just didn't try hard enough, or, you know, you're not positive enough. And I don't know. I get messages every single day from people whose mum or son or cousin or friend, whoever it is, has just been in an accident and become paralyzed. And I find it so difficult, because I remember those beginning few weeks where I would look to anyone for hope and I would really hold on to any single word they said. And I was searching everywhere to find someone who could say, if you do this, you'll be able to walk again. And I find it so hard, because I don't have anything to tell these people, and I don't ever want to give false hope. And also, life in a wheelchair isn't negative. I thought that it would be in the beginning because I didn't know anyone with a spinal cord injury. I thought that living in a wheelchair would be nothing but hard, and that's just not the case at all. I really learnt that, and I have so many friends who are absolutely thriving. And so I don't ever want to put out the message that being paralysed is bad and learning to walk again is good, you know?
Well, that is without doubt one of the most extraordinary stories I've ever heard. Can you even believe it? Like the part where she fell from the sky and didn't die and didn't even lose consciousness is just hard to get your head around. I'm so grateful for Emma sharing that part of her story. I had more questions, and we have made a bonus episode for subscribers.
I would never get to be the person who could run along the beach every morning or learn to surf or be able to go anywhere without planning how many catheters I need or taking a spare change of clothes because I might pee my pants. There was just so much more thinking involved.
Her answers absolutely blew me away, and you can listen to that episode right now by the link in the show notes. The producer of No Filter is Emmeline Peterson. The executive producer is Eliza Ratliff, who is also the boss of podcasts, and sound production is by Madeline Joannou. I'm Mia Friedman, and thank you for having me in your ears.